Well, good afternoon. This is a especially special occasion for me because 9 years ago, I actually was one of you. I was a student. I was more back of the audience than front of the audience, I admit, at the TED Talk. And I was there listening to one brilliant speaker, one after the other, and came away realizing how much I'd not done with my life and asking my own big question of thinking how all of this is really going to go for me. What will happen to me? And that's one of the big questions, isn't it? What's going to happen? What's next? And in that moment, I don't know how you all are thinking about this, but when I was 19, I thought my life would be defined by big things, great moments, graduations, probably some awards, moves, career pivots, jobs, marriage. Quick aside, so I'm engaged. And when I first, thank you. In fact, I just came from the wedding tasting this morning. When I first wrote this speech, without meaning to, no clues or anything regarding, I accidentally wrote the plural of that last word, marriages. And then I read it to my fiance. And Casey, lovely and brilliant, one of her many jobs is to tell me my great ideas from my slightly less than great ideas. For example, when we started our nonprofit, I built a website. And I went over to Casey's and said, we're going to build this amazing .com website. And she said, great, except it has to be .org. I said, what do you mean? She said, you're a nonprofit. It's got to be .org. I said, no, it doesn't. It's got to be .com. And she said, do you have any idea what you're talking about? And I said, of course I know what I'm talking about. But in the off chance that maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, would you please explain to me what you mean? And she said, well, that little thing after the dot, that stands for something. .com commercial, .org organization, .gov government, .net old and defunct and probably has a virus, don't visit it. And I said, okay, but you know, all the cool websites are .com, youtube.com, espn.com, google.com. I want a cool website, therefore it needs to be .com. And then Casey said, which is also, funnily enough, what she said when I wrote marriages instead of marriage. And I suppose the whole point of this is that I'm very glad that she caught many of my grammatical mistakes. And if you'd like to learn more about our nonprofit, please visit us at www.americanexchangeproject.org. Anyway, back to it. As I was saying, I thought my life would be defined by these big things: births, deaths, career pivots, jobs. And then maybe something would happen along the way that would be important enough that they'd ask me back many years later to give a TED Talk about it. And today's been kind of a funny day. I just got here, walked across Old Campus. And I'm now on this stage, and I'm realizing that life really isn't defined by big things, but by little ones. Passing ideas, everyday events, friendships, interactions you have on the side of the street that, without expecting them to, kind of grab your life and take them in a whole other direction. And incidentally, I think this is true for individuals and societies alike. What we are and who we're going, where we're going, is defined as much by small events as by large ones. And today I'm going to tell a story about something that I didn't think very much of in the weeks and months after it happened, but it's come to change my life and offer an idea, inspire an idea that might offer our country a way out of a terrible crisis. It began on July 4th, 2016 on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Now, Pine Ridge is very interesting because it is at once maybe the most beautiful county in America and also the poorest. It's hills and grasslands punctuated by cottonwood trees and buttes and badlands as far as the eye can see, and a life expectancy of about 50. That's the second lowest standard of living in the Western Hemisphere. Nobody talks about it. In fact, if Pine Ridge were its own country, it would have the second lowest life expectancy on planet Earth. I was there in the summer of 2016. I just finished my junior year at Yale, and I'd gotten a little funding from the Grand Strategy program here to go on a road trip to learn more about education in America's most impoverished communities. I was an American Studies major. I was inspired by great writers and thinkers like James Agee and Walker Evans, Alexis de Tocqueville, John Steinbeck, Dorothea Lange. And I wanted to take this big question, instead of talking to professors and big thinkers, policy experts, folks kind of here in the ivory tower, I wanted to hit the road. I wanted to talk to people in the middle of it. And so on the morning after my 22nd birthday, I borrowed my mom's Mazda CX-9 and drove 7,100 miles across the country. First stop was Cotulla, Texas, about 60 miles north of the Mexican border, where I kind of was a cowboy. They wouldn't say that, but I would say that. Made great friends, learned unforgettable lessons, went to church, ate barbecue, tried to rope a cow. Then hopped back in my mom's car and drove north to Pine Ridge, where I was enjoying the same sort of experience. But today was July 4th. Everyone was busy. No one was around. The people I'd been interviewing by the handful every day didn't want to talk. They were off having their own fun, so I thought I'd go have some fun of my own. And I remembered that morning that about a couple miles out of town, there was this break in the trees and a little dirt road, and I was told by a friend that that was a buffalo reserve, a big area of cordoned off land so that buffalo could populate the area. And so I went in the car, and off I went, and decided I'd do a little off-roading. Now, I don't know how much you know about automobiles, but going off-roading in a Mazda CX-9 is a little bit like trying to climb Mount Everest in Ugg boots and a poncho. Not the best idea. However, my father always told me that it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, so I thought, what the heck, let's go for it. I floored the gas pedal, and off we went, and I had a ball. Up and around the corner, climbing cliffs, jumping over crevices, bashing through rocks and bushes. I came across this huge valley, and there a herd of hundreds of buffalo were spread out grazing. I was all alone, no road, no nothing. Had an hour, had so much fun I couldn't even describe it in the weeks since. And I worked up also quite the appetite. So after about an hour, I turned the car back down the dirt road, drive away. And as I pull in to the hotel, where there was the one restaurant on the reservation, the car immediately comes to a complete halt, dead. I hit the brake, nothing. Gas pedal, nothing. Shift the gear, nothing. Every light on the dashboard is going up. I'd killed the car. I thought, okay, well, obviously, I go to Yale. I'm very brilliant. I can figure out anything. Let's get out of the car and see what's going on. I step out of the car. I open the hood, and I look down, and what I learned was that my knowledge of how to fix a car ends with opening the hood. Small panic attack. Calling everyone I know. Too bad everyone I know is on the East Coast, where they pointed out that I'm 1,000 miles away from them and they can't be of much help to me. Then the signal goes dead, and after a while, I flagged down somebody who brought me back to an apartment. A few hours later, somebody else called, but this somebody wasn't from my world back in the East Coast. This somebody was the one person I called there in the town I was staying in Kyle, South Dakota. His name's Aaron. Now, Aaron was adopted from the Philippines when he was a little kid. After he graduated high school, he grew up in rural South Carolina. He joined the military as an MP. Did several tours of duty, married a Lakota woman and moved to the res, worked at the local high school as a security guard. And 2 nights before, he'd had me over for dinner because he knew that I was alone. He also knew I was alone and in need of help in this situation. Aaron had tattoos from the top of his neck to the bottoms of his ankles, big earrings, a goatee. He drank enough Mountain Dew in a day to hydrate a small college football team. And he was maybe the nicest person I'd met in the entire time. He called me up and he said, hey, I heard the res turned your car into a res car. I chuckled and said, yeah, it had. And he said, well, tomorrow morning, let's check it out. The next morning arrives, he and I go over to the parking lot. Sure enough, the Mazda's sitting there. And he says, well, hop in and let's see if it starts. Sure enough, it started and it sounded totally fine. Aaron looked at me like, what kind of sick prank are you putting me through, you dang New Englander? And I said, no, watch what happens. He said, well, let's start driving to Rapid City, South Dakota. Now, mind you, we're on Pine Ridge. This is about as rural as South Dakota gets. The nearest mechanic, the nearest dealership, the Mazda dealership that would have been able to fix the car was 100 miles away. So we needed to get this car 100 miles, no idea how we're going to do this. We start driving, and about 3 miles in, the car breaks down again. We get out of the car. A plume of heat rises out of the engine. We have no idea what we're doing. We start calling tow companies, and they're all too expensive or frankly too sketchy to rely on. And then Aaron comes up with this idea. And he says, there's this group of guys here on the res called the Guardians, about 3 of them. They have trucks, they drive around, they help people out who are in need. And I said, are they reliable? And Aaron said, well, they're more reliable than anything we've got going for us right now. And for about 5 seconds, that moment stuck with me. More reliable than anything we've got going for us right now, us. But it wasn't his car stuck on the side of the road. Better yet, it wasn't his mother's car stuck on the side of the road. His fellowship wasn't on the line. His research wasn't in jeopardy. He was 15 miles from home, not 1,500. And still he chose to say, us. I suppose that stuck with me because in a way, it summarized the afternoon and kind of my whole trip. At a glance, Aaron and I had nothing in common. We were hardly even friends. We only kind of knew each other. And yet that day, he not only put himself in my shoes, he put himself in my problem. And he did so for no other reason than I was a person and I was in need. In fact, I bet today if I asked Aaron why he did all that, he wouldn't be able to say any reason other than it's just because that's what you do. Eventually, a guy named Vern came. He had a big red pickup truck. He pulled off to the side of the road and we got to work on the car. It turned out that in all my off-roading fun, I'd kicked up some rock or hit some bush and I dislodged a little piece of metal pipe that sat under the hood of the car, rusted out from one New England winter after another. And it broke open and it dislodged two rubber pieces of tube that carried the coolant from the coolant tank up into the engine. So the engine was overheating. It turned out that just up the road, there were a couple carpenters outfitting a barn. They let us sift through the back and the bed of the truck, finding little pieces of pipe after another. And sure enough, there was a water valve that fit perfectly into the two pieces of rubber tube. So we jammed in the valve, cinched it down, and started the car up. Sure enough, it worked fine. We drove it all the way up to Rapid City and got it to the Mazda dealership, where they told us they were going to have to order a very special part, probably from someplace like Japan or Germany, and it would take a week to fix the thing. Now, that's not the end of the story. In fact, the best part of the story was a week later when that dealership called me back and said, hey, guess what? We've been running tests on the car for a week. This part actually works better than the part we would order. And here's why. There's a little nozzle on the valve, and so you can turn it off in the winter and save a little money on coolant. That part, and Vern's work, and Aaron's us, not only got me home to Massachusetts, but it kept the car running for another 50,000 miles, 3 years. Today, 7 years later, I run a nonprofit that is, in a way, trying to give every single high school student in America a version of the same experience. It's called the American Exchange Project. We started it up a few years ago. And it's a national domestic exchange program for high school students. We fund students to spend a week in the summer after senior year in an American town that is totally different from the one that they are growing up in, politically, socioeconomically, geographically. So an Okie from Muskogee is going to go sit boba tea in Greenwich Village in Massachusetts, while a San Franciscan is going to learn how to ride a horse in Dillon, Montana. It's all free, and we have no strict admission criteria whatsoever. We do this because we believe these sorts of experiences in this country ought to be a public good, kind of like national parks or public libraries. Students travel in cohorts with other peers from all over the country. Trips are organized locally, and they're run by a local beloved high school teacher who we train and hire. In short, student to student, family to family, hometown to hometown, we are trying to weave this country back together again. And this is what it looks like. Just like that. Meet Emmett. Emmett is from an affluent liberal suburb of Boston. It's called Wellesley. We sent him down to a ranch not far from Cotulla, where he worked for the week with a friend of mine. Here, he's about to try and rope his first calf.
All right, you got this covered? That's 425, isn't it? So he's 457. He's should be right there in the corner. There he is. Step up to him. Step up to him. Valiant effort.
Before her trip, Alana had never been on an airplane before, and her home had been leveled by Hurricane Laura, so she was living in Houston at the time.
Okay, I'm about to go on this train station for the first time. I've never done anything like this. Is like the Ninja Turtles. It's very windy. Why is it so windy? Oh my God. Okay, so we're about to start, and they said this is the funnest part. What's up, guys? Oh, this is so cool. We're going really fast.
Next one. Yeah. Okay, that's Deirdre. Deirdre's from Hingham. She runs the Historical Society. She's giving a hug to Matt. Maddie's from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I trust you all know where that is. Deirdre's also like the nicest person in the world. Maddie is on her trip to Hingham. In Hingham, they have a huge July 4th parade, and Deirdre not only got them to walk in the parade, but she had them dressed up as colonists. And you should have seen the looks on the kids' faces from Dodge City, Oklahoma, Kansas, Muskogee, Oklahoma, Cotulla, Texas, Flanders, South Dakota, dressed up as colonists on an 85-degree day in Hingham with little children screaming for candy. Next one, please. This is a group in Lemon, South Dakota. Lemon's a town of about 1,000 people just on the border with North Dakota. These students are from Boston, Portland, Maine, Albany, California, and the Bronx. That's Fatima there on the left, and that's Amy on the right. Fatima's from Portland, Amy's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. They're at their first rodeo in Sheridan, Wyoming. And they told me that they taught as much to the folks in Sheridan as they learned from them. And that's Owen and that's Ian. They caught a fish in Riggins, Idaho. The fish is trying to make a run for it. I don't know what happened next, but I hope it got to the river. As you can see, they had not ever really been fishing before. Now we're doing all of this because despite what these pictures show, America is historically divided right now. Historians are comparing this decade to the 1850s on the eve of the Civil War, and they've got good reason to. In fact, over one-third, believe that the country would be better off if people on the other side just died. And in 2020, 40% of Americans believe that secession was a valid option if their candidate lost the election. That's on both sides, liberal and conservative. Meanwhile, for young people, the teen mental health crisis is spinning out of control. And as Robert Putnam showed us in his incredible book, Our Kids, the American Dream in Crisis, for a young person in this country today, the #1 predictor of their outcomes in life is not their skills or their work ethic, but the zip code into which they were born. But look what happens when a young person gets to spend just a little bit of time in a different hometown, when they get to grow up just a little bit in a different zip code. The cell phones go away, the ear pods come out of their ears, the distractions go away, and they're able to build relationships that have economic, social, and civic implications. And they bring their families, their communities, their friends right along for the ride with them. Imagine where we would be if every young person in this country got to have this experience. At AEP, that's our dream and our belief. We believe that this adventure ought to be the graduation present that every single American high school student gets. We believe that these sorts of trips, these one-week trips, ought to be ritualistic rites of passage in our society, as common to the high school experience as homecoming or the prom, and that the mobilization of a generation of young people needs to be the civic moonshot of this decade, especially if we don't want the next decade to be compared to the 1860s. Shortly after the Civil War, Mark Twain said that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. Many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. He said that broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. And over 100 years later, Maya Angelou said that by demonstrating that all peoples laugh, eat, cry, worry, and die, travel can introduce the idea that if we try and understand each other, we may even become friends. Already at AEP, we're seeing what the both of them were talking about. We have students who say that they want to go work in their exchange towns. Other students have monthly Zoom calls together. In 3 years, our enrollment has gone from 20 to 350, from 4 high schools in 4 states to 57 high schools in 34 states all over the country. We have students calling the manager of the ranch they worked on as a mentor. We have other students who are, one student actually this week flew from Denver to her exchange town and stayed with her host mom, and the pair of them toured colleges in the area. She never imagined that she could go to college beyond where she was from. If we can expand these opportunities to all people, if we can expand these sorts of experiences to every student, if we can have students walk in the shoes of other people, if we can have them reach out to one another, to come into conversation with each other, it's the beginning of what will bring this divided country back together. These sorts of experiences leave students not just with lessons learned and firsthand experiences. They leave them with happy memories. In my mind, I go back to that moment in South Dakota all the time. It helps guide me. It helps show me who I am. It helps remind me that the little moments can go a long way, that the everyday interactions can go a long way. It shows me that instead of digging into our own sides right now and hurling insults at one another, propagating stereotypes left and right, we need to reach out. We need to find experiences that will help us see our common humanity beneath the escalating rhetoric. We need to learn more about the circumstances that shape the experiences that people have, because it's those experiences that shape our beliefs. If we can do that, if we can reach out, we'll begin to understand that finally, at the end, and underneath it all, there is no other, no them, just one big us. Thank you.